There's a few common workflows, and this is the one that I talked about already. So kind of do a little bit of exploration, do a little bit of planning, and ask me for confirmation before you start to write code. These other two on the right are extremely powerful. When Claude has some way to check its work, so for example, by writing unit tests or screenshotting in Puppeteer or screenshotting the iOS simulator, then it can iterate. And this is incredible because if you give it, for example, a mock and you say, build this web UI, it'll get it pretty good. But if you let it iterate 2 or 3 times, often it gets it almost perfect. So the trick is give it some sort of tool that it can use for feedback to check its work. And then based on that, it will iterate by itself, and you're going to get a much better result. So for whatever your domain is, if it's unit test or integration test or screenshots for apps or web or anything, just give it a way to see its result, and it'll iterate and get better. So these are the next steps. Teach Claude how to use your tools and figure out the right workflow. If you want Claude to jump in a code, if you want it to brainstorm a little bit, make a plan, if you want it to iterate, kind of have some sense of that so you know how to prompt Claude to do what you want. As you go deeper, beyond tools, you want to start to give Claude more context. And the more context, the smarter the decisions will be, because as an engineer working in a code base, you have a ton of context in your head about your systems and all the history and everything else. So there's different ways to give this to Claude. And as you give Claude more context, it'll do better. There's different ways to do this. The simplest one is what we call ClaudeMD. And Claude.md is the special file name. The simplest place to put it is in the project root. So the same directory you start Claude in, put a ClaudeMD in there. And that'll get automatically read into context at the start of every session. And essentially, the first user turn will include the ClaudeMD. You can also have a local ClaudeMD. And this one, you don't usually check into source control. So ClaudeMD, you should check into source control, share with your team so that you can write it once and share it with your team. This one, you don't check in. It's just for you. The kinds of things you put in ClaudeMD, it's like common bash commands, common MCP tools, architectural decisions, important files, anything that you would kind of typically need to know in order to work in this code base. Try to keep it pretty short, because if it gets too long, it's just going to use up a bunch of context, and it's usually not that useful. So just try to keep it as short as you can. And for example, in our code base, we have common bash commands, we have a style guide, we have a few core files, kind of things like that. All the other ClaudeMDs, you can put them in other nested child directories, and Claude will pull them in on demand. So these are the ClaudeMDs that will get pulled in automatically. But then also you can put ClaudeMDs in nested directories, and those will get automatically pulled when Claude works in those directories. And of course, if you're a company, maybe you want a ClaudeMD that's shared across all the different code bases, and you want to manage it on behalf of your users, and you can put it in your enterprise root, and that'll get pulled in automatically. There's a ton of ways to pull in context. I actually had a lot of trouble putting this slide together just to communicate the breadth of ways you can do this. But ClaudeMD is pulled in automatically. You can also use slash commands. So this is .claude/commands, and this can be in your home directory, or it can be checked into your project. And this is for slash commands. And over here, we have a few examples of the slash commands that we have in Claude Code itself. And so for example, if you're in the Claude Code repo, and you see issues getting labeled, that's actually this workflow running here. It's labeled GitHub issues. And we have a GitHub action running, the same one we talked about this morning, where Claude Code will run this command, and it's just a slash command. It'll run, and it'll label the issues, so humans don't have to. It just saves us a bunch of time. And of course, you can @mention files to pull them into context. And like I said before, ClaudeMDs in a nested directory get pulled in when Claude works in that directory. So give Claude more context, and it's definitely worth taking the time to tune context. You can run it through a prompt improver, consider who the context is for, if you want to pull it in every time, if you want to pull it in on demand, if you want to share it with a team, if it's a personal preference, definitely take the time to tune it. This will improve performance dramatically if you do it right. As you get more advanced, you're going to want to think about this a little bit more, this kind of hierarchy of different ways to pull in everything. So like not just ClaudeMD, but also config and kind of everything about Claude you can pull in this hierarchical way. So projects, are specific to your Git repo, and this you can check in, or you can make it just for you. You can also have global configs that are across all your projects, or you can have enterprise policies. And this is essentially a global config that you roll out for all of your employees, everyone on your team automatically. And this slide is like pretty information dense, but the point is this applies to a lot of stuff. So you can do this for slash commands. You can do it for permissions. So for example, if you have a bash command that you would run for all your employees, like all your employees use this like test command, for example, you can actually just check it into this enterprise policies file. And then any employee, when they run this command, it will be auto-approved, which is pretty convenient. And you can also use this to block commands. So for example, let's say there's a URL that should never be fetched. Just add it to this config, and that'll make it so an employee cannot override it, and that URL can never be fetched. So pretty convenient both to unblock people and also just to keep your code base safe. And then same thing for MCP servers. Have an MCP JSON file, check it into the code base. That way, anytime someone runs Claude Code in your code base, they'll be prompted to install the MCP servers and share it with the team. If you're not sure which of these to use, this is like a kind of an insane matrix because we support a lot of stuff and engineer workflows are very flexible and every company is different, so we kind of want to support everything. So if you're not sure how to get started, I would recommend start with shared project context. You write this once and then you share it with everyone on the team and you get this kind of network effect where someone does a little bit of work and everyone on the team benefits. There's a lot of tools built into Claude to manage this. So as an example, if you run /memory, you can see all the different memory files that are getting pulled in. So maybe I have an enterprise policy, I have my user memory, I have project ClaudeMD, and then maybe there's a nested ClaudeMD that's only pulled in for certain directories. And then similarly, when you do /memory, you can edit particular memory files. When you type # to remember something, you can pick which memory you want it to go to. So yeah, that's the next step. Take the time to configure ClaudeMD, MCP servers, all the stuff that your team uses so that you can use it once, configure it once, and then share it with everyone. An example of this is in our apps repo for Anthropic. This is like the repo that we have all of our web and apps code in. There's a Puppeteer MCP server, and we share this with the team. And there's an MCP JSON checked in, so any engineer working in that repo can use Puppeteer in order to pilot end-to-end tests and to screenshot automatically and iterate so that every engineer doesn't have to install it themselves. This is a talk about pro tips. So I just want to take a quick interlude to talk about some common key bindings that people may not know. It's very hard to build for terminal. It's also very fun. It feels like rediscovering this new design language. But something about terminals, it's extremely minimal. And so sometimes it's hard to discover these key bindings. And here's just a quick reference sheet. So anytime you can hit Shift-Tab to accept edits. And this switches you into auto-accept edits mode. So bash commands still need approval, but edits are auto-accepted. And you can always ask Claude to undo them later. For example, I'll do this if I know Claude's on the right track, or if it's writing unit tests and iterating on tests. I'll usually just switch into auto-accept mode, so I don't have to OK every single edit. Anytime you want Claude to remember something, so for example, if it's not using a tool correctly and you want it to use it correctly from then on, just type the # and then tell it what to remember, and it'll remember it. It'll incorporate it into ClaudeMD automatically. If you ever want to drop down to bash mode, so just run a bash command, you can hit the exclamation mark and type in your command. That'll run locally, but that also goes into the context window, so Claude will see it on the next turn. And this is pretty good for long-running commands if you know exactly what you want to do, or any command that you want to get into context. And Claude will see the command and the output. You can @mention files and folders. Anytime you can hit escape to stop what Claude is doing. No matter what Claude is doing, you can always safely hit escape. It's not going to corrupt the session. It's not going to mess anything up. So maybe Claude is doing a file edit. I'll hit escape. I'll tell it what to do differently. Or maybe it suggested a 20-line edit, and I'm like, actually, 19 of these lines look perfect, but one line you should change. I'll hit escape. I'll tell it that, and then I'll tell it to redo the edit. You can hit escape twice to jump back in history. And then after you're done with the session, you can start Claude with a resume to resume that session if you want, or -- continue. And then anytime if you want to see more output, hit Control-R. And that'll show you the entire output, the same thing that Claude sees in its context window. The next thing I want to talk about is the Claude Code SDK. So we talked about this at the top. Right after this, Sid is doing a session, I think just across the hallway, and he's going to go super deep on the SDK. If you hadn't played around with this, if you use the -p flag in Claude, this is what the SDK is. And we've been landing a bunch of features over the last few weeks to make it even better. So yeah, you can build on top of this. You can do cool stuff. This is exactly the thing that Claude Code uses. It's exactly the same SDK. And so, for example, something you can do is Claude-P. So this is the CLI SDK. You can pass a prompt. You can pass some allowed tools, which could include specific bash commands. And you can tell it which format you want. So you might want JSON, or you might want streaming JSON if you want to process this somehow. So this is awesome for building on. We use this in CI all the time. We use this for incident response. We use this in all sorts of pipelines. So really convenient. Just think of it as like a Unix utility. You give it a prompt, it gives you JSON. You can use this in any way. You can pipe into it, you can pipe out of it. The piping is also pretty cool. So you can use, like, for example, git status and pipe this in, and use JQ to select the result. The combinations are endless, and it's sort of this new idea. It's like a super intelligent Unix utility. And I think we barely scratched the surface of how to use this. We're just figuring this out. And there's a lot that you can get done in parallel. So yeah, that's it.
的点赞关注哦。